welcome to everyone for joining us for another User Vision breakfast briefing. We have these events about monthly, roughly, and they're on various topics in our wonderful world of user experience and usability. Typically, we pick a niche area and just have a deep talk about that with either one of the User Vision team or friends of User Vision in the wider UX and service design community. And I'm very pleased today to be having what I think is a very special presenter for our session, and that is Thomas Geis. He is a very experienced human-centered design consultant based over in Germany, and as you can probably guess from his, if you've been over to Cologne, that's where he's actually based, as well as having a nice Cologne-based background there. So he's a human-centered design consultant and leader of ProContext. ProContext, apologies, which is based there, and it's a leading human-centered design consultancy in Germany. I know Thomas more from his role as president of the International UX Qualification Board, which is the body that is behind and promoting a range of training courses on certification in user experience. So certified professional usability and user experience. And there's a whole series of training courses on that, one of which is about user requirements. It's an advanced course after you have the foundation course. And I attended that course a couple years ago, and it was actually fabulous, I thought. It really opened my eyes to the world of user requirements, which I was aware of as their very important role in the human-centered design process. But I think what inspired me is how Thomas could present these user requirements, which might sound as a very much a constraining thing in one's life. You know, these are requirements you have to comply with, but how they can be very inspirational and empowering for your organization to look at their problem and come up with some solutions in a very different way. So at the risk of stealing a little bit too much of Thomas's thunder, I will hand over to Thomas to give a further introduction and to talk to us about how you can apply user requirements for innovative products. And I will talk to you at the end. Over to you, Thomas.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Hello, everybody. Let's get started. I've got about 40 to 45 minutes to talk about user requirements and how to use them to come up with innovative ideas for innovative products. And the first thing I want to talk about is what is the outcome of so-called user research? What is innovation from the user's perspective? Because everybody, is talking about innovation, and if you work for companies, innovation is a heavily used term. But if you ask in companies, what is your definition of innovation, you will find that people have different viewpoints on what innovation is. Therefore, it's quite helpful to have a definition of it. How to identify innovation in a given context of customers. This is how to really identify user needs and derive user requirements. Then I have this item twice on the list. Okay, but I will only talk about it once. How to structure user requirements that point to innovation, and what is actually the difference between user needs, user requirements, and so-called user stories. So that's the content for the next 45 minutes. And let me just say a few words about myself. I'm an engineer. I'm an engineer, a trained engineer for automation engineering, and this I studied about 30 years ago. And, as so many people who work in human-centered design, somehow I got into this subject, although I hadn't studied it. And in 1993, I started to work as a usability tester for safety critical systems at that time. And I did spend 10 years in just doing usability testing for medical devices, for control rooms in nuclear power stations, and all kinds of things that are sort of, where usability and usability mainly plays a major role. And if you spend 10 years in presenting results of usability tests to clients, where you basically frustrate them all the time, you always come up with data that no one was expecting and no one was hoping to get. That was my experience. That's what I experienced in the role of a usability tester. So if you spend 10 years in coming up with not so good news and you ask for money for those not so good news, you have to somehow find a way to communicate problems such that they turn into something engaging for your clients. And the way that worked for me was that I learned how to retransform problems that we found in products into, or systems, products and systems. I learned how to retransform problem statements into requirement statements. And I found out that in a way, a problem is basically a statement about an unmet user need or an unsatisfied user requirement, and especially in usability testing. And once you communicate data as requirements to be met, all of a sudden they become engaging. That's how I got into the field of user requirements engineering, and I stayed with it for 30 years. After 10 years of testing, I founded my own company in 2003, which is already 18 years ago, ProContext, based in Cologne. And we are a bunch of engineers who work for rather large companies and help them in very early phases of projects to identify what is really needed from the perspective of those who you want to make more effective and efficient. And this is sort of the work that I'm doing. I'm quite engaged in standards work. I'm one of the few people who thinks it's good fun or great fun to standardize rules in usability engineering. I'm just fascinated by identifying guidelines that can be reused, and therefore I ended up in actively contributing in ISO standardization for usability and user experience. Okay, that much about me. And these days, first subject, what is the outcome of user research? These days, lots of companies talk about user research. If you look for in LinkedIn, if you go into LinkedIn and you check for job openings that contain the word user research in California, you find several thousand job offerings down there. And if you then sort them by companies, you easily find out it's all those companies that are rather innovative or that are associated with innovation. I don't talk about the names here, but just try it out to see that user research seems to be something that helps companies to innovate. And the big trouble we're having with user research in practice is, to begin with, if we are, let's say, human-centered design professionals or user experience professionals or business analysts, it is typically rather questioned to talk to users in the project in early phases, because many projects believe they know everything already. They know all about their users. That's a common trap that projects are in. So if you ask yourself, maybe not what is the outcome of user research, what should be the outcome of user research, I want to draw a little picture for us. And this picture I've been drawing for, let's say, the last 15 years. Whenever I come into a meeting where people don't know me, or where people ask, what is your contribution to our project, I tend to draw a picture on the whiteboard. And as we are remote here, I will draw it on this virtual whiteboard here. And it's not a complicated thing, but it's a basic model where my experience tells me, if you understand this model, it is, or if you understand this model, it is quite engaging for projects to apply it in practice. And it ends up with having to do user research, but it's a motivator to do so. Now, anyway, if we look into projects where products are being developed, one thing that we know is that right from the beginning, the project is engaged. We also call it blue sky mode. And everybody is busy with the solution, and most people in the project, most stakeholders in the project, have their own picture about what the solution, what the outcome of the project should be. And the trouble by the end of the day is that the solution that we are building has to work for those who are supposed to use it. And these people might, in the end of a project, tell us that what we have given them is not exactly what they were looking for. And therefore, it is important to understand that if we are building a product, a system, this system, product or system, always has two phases. It has two phases. And it has one phase for the user. That's what we call the user interface. I always talk about the system above the hood. The thing that the part of the system or the product that users perceive, that they touch, that they interact with. So basically, when we are building a solution, we are building something above the hood and something technical under the hood. So basically, we're having two projects. When we are building a product or a system, we are effectively having two projects because we're building the product from the user's perspective, and we're building the product from the system's perspective. And everybody who builds a product or a system wants this product or system to be a quality thing, a thing with high quality. And if you ask yourself again, what is the definition of quality, and you look up, standards or whatever, the very short definition of quality is a solution that meets the requirements on the solution. That's quality. So if you want to build quality solutions, you have to know the requirements for the solution. And here, being an engineer, I tend to be rather literal. If the solution has two faces, it has a face above the hood and a face under the hood, then we are faced with the same situation when it comes to requirements. We have requirements for the solution above the hood, and these are called user requirements. They are part of the so-called stakeholder requirements, which I will not dive into today. It's just that term user requirements that I want to stress a bit. So we're having user requirements, and they turn into technical system requirements, which are then the basis for the technical solution. So the user requirements are the basis for the user interface, and the system requirements are the basis for the technical solution. That's a sort of a simple approach to how to deal with requirements. A very simple approach, actually. Now, in systems engineering, there's actually a standard systems lifecycle management, which says that there should not be technical requirements, system requirements, unless they are capable to serve for user requirements or other non-technical stakeholder requirements. So when we are doing our system requirements specification, we have to be aware of each and every system requirement serves a purpose other than a technical one. It serves a purpose above the hood. And that's why user requirements are the basis for system requirements. And yes, especially in software development, it has become, well, almost self-evident that if you are building a software, that you first should design the user interface, test it with users before you really build the technical solution for it, because that's the cheap way of getting something usable without having lots and lots of changes in late phases of the project. But anyway, that's a very simple picture that explains that if you want to build a good solution from the user's perspective, you should have good requirements for a good solution. And the question then is, where do those requirements come from? Do they fall from the sky, or do we just collect them as a project team? Where do requirements come from? And here it starts becoming a little bit difficult, because requirements are there, or requirements are always based, in particular the user requirements are based on what we call user needs. And the big question in project always is, what are the user needs? What are the user needs that we base our requirements on, or that our requirements can be traced back to? And needs versus requirements is something that we struggle with in practice. We struggle with it. Every company, if I visit clients and I sit in the lobby because I'm waiting for my contact there, typically you see PowerPoint slides telling you all about what that company does. And there is at least one slide telling you, we make sure that we meet the needs of our customers and the needs of our users. But if you look into specifications or any sort of documentation, you will have a hard time finding a single statement of a user need. And those user needs statements, if we look at them, they are always statements about a user group that needs to know something or needs to have something. To know something is typically information. You need to know some information, or you need to have a specific resource in order to decide or perform something, okay? I'll come up with an example soon, a very practical example where you already see the power of this. But user needs are statements that don't look at our system, the system that we're building. They strictly look at the context of use of those who we are building for. And these user needs, they are actually the basis for user requirements. Whether you ever specify them, whether you ever write them down or not, every user requirement can be traced back to a user need. And if you want to put a user requirement in the chat and argue about that, we can certainly trace it back to a user need, although you might have never written it down. Anyway, user needs. Where do user needs come from? There's all these statements. I don't put those slides on anymore, where John Ford, said that if I had asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Or other people, Steve Jobs said lots of things about it. Basically, what the successful people in product design, including Karl Lagerfeld, who was a clothes designer, he was once asked, how do you find out what is a nice piece of clothes for people, And he said the last thing you want to do is ask people what they would like to wear, because they are expecting me to come up with this. They want to be surprised by me with something that they will like, although they don't know that they would like it. Okay. Anyway, all those leaders in the field of product development and product management, I would really associate people like Ford and Lagerfeld to that group of people. They tell you, if you want to find out what users need, avoid one question, and that question is, what do you need? And again, if you want to challenge that statement, but you get that not from I haven't invented it, I haven't made it up, I've been told this. If you challenge that, you will always find out. If you practice asking people what they need, they don't tell you what they need, they tell you what they want. And what they want is typically something that they have seen from a competitor or they have seen in another product. And as they have seen it, they reflect that, they remember that, and they tell you what they want. So that's the trouble with user needs in terms of asking our users or customers what they need. They tend to tell us what they want, which is a different thing. And by the way, all these terms are defined. User want is defined, user need is defined. It's quite interesting. User requirement, all of this is defined, not in sort of clumsy terms. Anyway, so if we want to find out what the needs of our users are, the one thing that user experience professionals and user-centered design professionals always stress is that they say, you have to analyze the context of use. And context of use always means that we understand who are our users or user groups, what are the tasks that they have to do that we want to support, which resources do they use already besides what we want to bring them, and which environment are they in while they complete their tasks. And there you differentiate between physical and social environment. And the whole idea of that model is that if you want to find user needs, you have to look into the context of use. And what's classically called context of use analysis, identifying what's happening in the life of our users, this is what now has become a buzzword called user research. And the whole question is, if you do user research or context of use analysis, whatever you want to call it, stakeholder engagement, maybe if you are a business analyst, you would say, let's look what they really do and engage them in our system based on that. But the big question always is, if you do user research or context of use analysis, what do you do with these data? What do you do with these data? If you have interviewed users, and there is a bit of a rough rule which says if you have 10 questions that you ask a person, 10 open questions into their context of use, you have to expect that for each of this question, you get half a page of DIN A4 paper of text. So if you have 10 questions after an interview, you have five pieces of DIN A4 paper. The question is how to process these data, what to do with it, because project members typically don't want to read narrative text. We tend to produce narrative text based on interviews, but nobody wants to read it afterwards. Our team members ask, and what do we do now? What do we do now? And this is where user needs analysis and deriving user requirements based on that information, on that context of user information, has a major role. And I just want to show you, this picture I draw all the time. I always draw it on the wall, and my experience is if you draw it the way I did it, like, you start with a solution and you end up with the context of use, you already create a motivation to look into this context of use information. And what you then need is just a good example that works for the people in the room, a good example on how to apply that. And here is an example that a few more lines. The two boxes down there are called problem space. I always surprise myself with my animated slides. And the two boxes up there are called the solution space. And it's a simple model. It has 4 boxes. It has 6 information items in there. And it's something people can remember, and people can sort of, a project team can sort of, what's the word, refer to when they have discussions. So if you look into an example of how to apply that, I lately use the example of an alarm clock. An alarm clock. Imagine, you are a manufacturer of alarm clocks, and you are the number 1 on earth with alarm clocks. Your alarm clocks are the most wanted ones around the globe, and everybody has it at home. And that's already part of a problem that you're having. As everybody has this alarm clock, you might not sell alarm clocks anymore because they never break, and once people have to get rid of them, they put them on eBay, and then the next person buys your alarm clocks. These alarm clocks are everywhere. The trouble you have from a business perspective is you don't sell alarm clocks anymore because everybody has them already and they never break. Sounds maybe a bit awkward statement, but there are companies in Germany, renowned companies for household equipment, who build products that never break, and everybody's happy with them. And these companies ask themselves, goodness, how do we stimulate purchase impulses? I don't know if that is English. In German, you talk about the purchase impulse. And if we look at that simple example of an alarm clock, and we want to innovate alarm clocks, and we ask ourselves, what is it that we might have overlooked in 70 years of building alarm clocks in terms of user requirements? Well, you simply look into the context of use of alarm clocks. And I've done that commercially, actually. And when we started, doing user research for alarm clocks, we first said, well, we have to differentiate between people who have a job, who have to get up in the morning, children who have to go to school in the morning, business travelers. We looked at all kinds of profiles of users. And once we started doing our interviews to find out what is really happening in the context of alarm clocks, we found out there are 2 major user groups that we weren't aware of before we had started the analysis. And these 2 major user groups are light sleepers, and I call them through sleepers. Light sleepers are people, some of you on the line will be light sleepers. These are the people who wake up during the night every 2 to 3 hours. You have a light sleep. And when you wake up, what you do is you inspect some clock, typically not your alarm clock, because this lately has been put onto your smartphone. It is part of your smartphone. But many people, especially light sleepers, have a clock in the room, often an LED clock that they can look at during the night. Sometimes placed at the window, sometimes it's an analog clock on the wall, which in the dark has this, what is it? It shines a bit. There are these clocks that you can see in the dark because I don't know the word for that in English, but you know what I'm talking about. Actually, it's these pointers here. They have this thing that shines during night. Anyway, if you interview people who have a light sleep in comparison to through sleepers, you get information like light sleepers, and they are our user group, wake up every 2 hours while they sleep. Sleeping is their task. That's the task that they try to perform. Sleeping well is actually the task they try to perform, which they don't manage. And when they wake up, they inspect the clock on the windowsill, for example, and that would be a resource. It's not our alarm clock. It's something else. You wouldn't put your alarm clock on the windowsill, because if it starts beeping, you would have to get out of the bed. Nobody wants that, unless you are part of another specific user group, but we're not getting into details here. So they inspect the clock on the windowsill for the current time. And typically they lie in a bed next to somebody, which is rather natural. Somebody else, that's the social environment. And this all happens in a bedroom, physical environment. Now, when you talk to light sleepers and you get that information and you ask yourself, what is it these people either need to have or need to know? One of the user needs that you can identify is that the light sleeper needs to know how much longer they can sleep to decide whether they get up or stay in bed. Because if you really get into a deep interview with them, in-depth interview, that's what we call it, and you ask them, when you look at the clock and you know the time, what do you do now? Well, typically what they do is they make a calculation. They ask themselves, well, hang on, for which time did I set the alarm clock? Was it 6:30? Did I set it at all? These are questions that all of a sudden they ask themselves. And then they make a calculation, how much longer can I sleep? And then they decide whether they get up or stay in bed. Plenty of people think that if they go to the toilet quickly, that they might sleep better afterwards. All these things you get out of interviews, not of group interviews, obviously, but of what we call contextual interviews, one-by-one interviews. Anyway, you would find out, if you analyze that user group, that the light sleeper, and that is the user group, needs to know how much longer they can sleep, because they wake up during sleep, to decide whether they get up or stay in bed. That's what they decide based on that. Lots of people get up 1 hour earlier than the alarm clock comes on, because they say, come on, it's not worth it to fall asleep again, because I know exactly what it's like when I wake up. With the alarm clock, I will be almost dead, as soon as this thing comes on. That's a common experience that light sleepers have. Now, anyway, this is an example for a user need. And the interesting aspect of such user need is that the alarm clock itself doesn't appear in the user need. The user need does not care about the alarm clock. The user need cares about the task that somebody wants to perform, which is sleeping well. We all want to sleep well. There's not a single person on earth who doesn't want to sleep well. We all try it. Light sleepers have a hard time with it. Through sleepers have an easy time with it. All these through sleepers from the hotel. If you stay in a hotel and in the morning you hear the alarm clock on the room above you, which rings forever, let's say 1 hour, you always wonder, who is this person? In the hotel, you always have that. This is a through sleeper. It's a specific user group, a specific human being. And they don't have many needs when it comes to alarm clocks, because they tend to sleep well. They sleep so well that they never wake up. Anyway, looking at the light sleeper, if we ask ourselves, if that is the need that such a user group has, and it's a rather large user group, and we ask ourselves, which requirement can we draw from this in terms of what shall the user with a alarm clock be able to, what we call, recognize, to either hear or see or feel, or select something. You can select the time when you want to wake up, or to input, which I wouldn't know what that would be for this example. We would come up with a requirement which says, with the system, we always call it the system, because we don't know whether it is an alarm clock in the end. With the system, the user shall be able to recognize how much time is left until the alarm starts. That is a user requirement that you can draw from that user need down here. With the system, the user shall be able to recognize how much time is left until the alarm starts. And if you truly ask yourself, does your alarm clock satisfy that user requirement? It's hard to find an alarm clock that does that. Having said that, there is one. You can buy it, okay? I haven't built it, but I've come up with this requirement before it was on the market. Anyway, as a showcase, Anyway, the user requirement simply states what a user with a prospective solution, we don't know what it will look like, what this user shall be able to recognize or to select or to input into that system. So for each and every user need, we simply ask ourselves, if this is the need and we would have a prospective solution for it, what should the user be able to do with it? And that is an example for such a user requirement. And if you look at context of use information or user research data, you might have 10 pages or 5 pages, I said before, 5 pages of paper based on one interview. And after you analyze the interview data, you might have five to 7 user needs, where you say, come on, friends, we talked to them in detail about lots of things. And the ultimate, let's say, gold nuggets that we got out of this is the following user needs that are not satisfied, where we have potential for our products to be innovative for the user, because they solve a problem, if you like, that has not been solved yet. And sure, from a system requirements perspective, you would say, an engineer would say, come on, if this thing shall technically be made happen, you would say, technically, the system, the alarm clock, if you like, shall continuously calculate the difference between current time and set alarm time. That's an obvious thing to happen under the hood, to make sure above the hood you see the information that is encapsulated in that user requirement here. Anyway, this is the sort of the logic behind it. It's something that you can learn how to do this. It's something that you don't have to be a guru or what. It's a bit of math. It's engineering. It's like needs and requirements engineering. And let's see in a minute what a solution could look like based on this user requirement. And it's just one example for a user requirement. Of course, there are more user requirements on an alarm clock. The obvious ones, with the alarm clock, the user shall be able to select the time when the alarm clock shall ring. Okay, sounds a bit academic, but that's a requirement statement for an alarm clock. And also with the alarm clock, the user shall be able to see the current time, sure. But the statement that we're seeing here is not about seeing the current time, because we don't want users to make a big calculation in the middle of the night that stresses them in terms of how much longer can I sleep, which they want to find out and never find out. They have to make this calculation. We want to give this as a solution to the user. Now, before I look at the solution here, I want to very briefly talk about the term innovation. The term innovation is often misinterpreted as simply something technically new that wasn't possible before. A new technology that has come over and that allows us to do things that we couldn't do before. That's a sort of a classical view on innovation. But if you look at the definition of innovation from the Usability Professionals Association in Germany in 2012, they have defined the term, because it was always the question, what is an innovation from the user's perspective? And the definition of innovation here is a solution to a problem that a user only becomes aware of after the problem has been solved by the solution that we give him. So if we really ask ourselves, where do those wow effect come from? A wow effect is typically you get something that you didn't expect. You experience something that you didn't expect. So I think it's quite a nice definition of the terms innovation, a solution that the person who has a solution to a problem where the person who has that problem only becomes aware of that problem once it has disappeared. That's the idea of that definition. Okay, so if we look at the alarm clock, we would say, and here is our light sleeper in the real world. If we look at our alarm clock, we would say, well, if the light sleeper can see how much longer he can stay in bed, and he sees it just looking at the alarm clock, then one user need has been satisfied. And that is something that the average producers of these systems have not really thought about so far. And all you do is you do a needs analysis, and then you find out that this little green thing that you see here is highly relevant to a specific user group. But this user group is pretty big in terms of membership. I think it's about 40% of society. Anyway, now I just used that as an example to show you that applying user needs actually brings you to user requirements that you might not have come across without looking at the user need. The user need is, so to say, a stimulus to find user requirements that are not that obvious, And if you want to do this commercially, and you want to identify this in a structured way, the most important bit is that if we do analysis with our users, we should not talk about the user needs with them. We should not talk about the user requirements with them, and we should not talk about our solution with them. Maybe some people say, but is that really true? Well, come on. The time you have with a user, you should really invest in finding out what's happening in their real life. And the time that we have to speak to users is limited. And as this time is limited, we should make the most of it in terms of finding out what's happening in their real life. And it's not just what we call the pain points. We tend to ask for pain points. Of course, we try to find the problems by asking for the problems. But many of these problems, the users themselves are not aware of. So the more you just talk about what's happening in their real life, the more you can afterwards identify the needs in there that they probably confirm the needs, but they would not have talked about those needs when you had a discussion with them. So most important is if we talk to users or we observe users, which is much more expensive than talking to them. And we can debate this for hours, whether the one thing works or the other thing works. My experience is, as long as you talk to users about what they do, they're having a hard time telling you strange stories. Once you talk about what they want or need, they have an easy time telling you, giving you data that might not be authentic. Okay. Now, the way this whole process works is we write down as much as we can about the context of use of our users. Then this is then called an as-is scenario, a free text description of what happens in people's life. And based on these as-is scenarios, we then look at what is it that the people need. And for this, we have a structured phrase that we apply. And once you really apply that phrase of user needs, you do identify what's needed there. And then you can derive the user requirements. That's a sort of analytical process. In requirements engineering, you call these tables traceability matrices. We just call them an analyzed as-is scenario, okay, where human-centered design people were not having these fancy words. But based on such a approach, you can come up with a structured list of user requirements. And I have another example here, which is from a manufacturer or from a context that a manufacturer took serious, and the guys who have put this into life made millions with it. This is about boiling eggs, you know. Having breakfast with boiled eggs. I've done an analysis on that almost 20, but pretty exactly 20 years ago, where we analyzed in small families, you know, mother, father, and small kid, what is actually happening during breakfast there. And that was on behalf of manufacturers of kitchen equipment. And I just have a bit of an extract from such an interview here on the left side. I'll read it out to you. It's not very long. The Millers managed to have breakfast all together at least, or together at least 2 times a week. And then they have breakfast eggs. You know, having breakfast eggs for many people is something beautiful at the table. To look at eggs is a good start of the day, you know. And Mrs. Miller has her egg always soft boiled. Mr. Miller wants it medium boiled. The child gets a hard boiled egg. And it is not asked about this solely because for health and safety reasons, the egg must be hard boiled. For the kid, you know, the kid gets the hard boiled egg. There's more behind that. If you look into the details, it falls off the table anyway. And then Mr. Miller takes it to work, you know, so they make good use of these broken eggs. And with hard eggs, that easily works. Now, anyway, Mr. Miller is typically the first one to get up. He is a morning person. He then prepares the breakfast. So that is a bit of a description of what happens in the context of having breakfast in a small family. And if you would read it like that, it's just information where, you know, if you build egg boilers, let's say automatic egg boilers, you would ask yourself, and what's new, Thomas? Okay, you're giving us a story about 2 adults and a kid telling us that they eat eggs for breakfast. What on earth is new here? What can we do with this information? Now, if you look into the user needs in that situation, you would find out the breakfast preparer, it's Mr. Miller here, it's one user group in this overall setup, needs to know the preference of each breakfast participant regarding their breakfast egg. That's what we call a prerequisite. To be able to make all eggs with the desired consistency. That's what we call an intended outcome. That we make the eggs with the desired consistency. Now, what you do with this statement is you simply now ask yourself, if we had a system that satisfies this user need, what shall the user of that system be able to recognize or select or input into the system? It's always 3 questions you ask yourself. What shall the user be able to recognize? What shall the user be able to select? What shall the user be able to input? And one requirement that comes out of this, if you really do this mathematically, you know, mathematically you go through this, with the system, the user shall be able to select how many eggs are to become soft-boiled, how many medium-boiled, and how many hard-boiled. This you can derive from that user need. Secondly, with the system, the user shall or must, I'm always getting that wrong, shall be able to recognize at the egg boiler, after the boiling process, which eggs are soft-boiled, which are medium-boiled, and which are hard-boiled. And exactly remember, it's bad English, sorry, I'll correct that before I give you the handout. I exactly remember when we produced those requirements to our client at the time, they said, very interesting, but impossible to build, impossible to build. And 3 years after, we came up with these data, the company had built something. And looking at the standard, the classical approaches to boiling eggs, if you look at them, the biggest competitor to, let's say, systems that help you boiling eggs is the classical pan in the kitchen. That's the thing that is always there. People love it. There's always this pan for multiple purposes, making tea, water, and whatnot. This small pan that is always nicely cleaned and always close to you. This is the classical, let's say, interactive system to boil eggs. Then there are other solutions that would probably never pass a safety audit, like this one here, where you can pull out eggs, you see what it is, and it's deadly dangerous. It doesn't work. I don't know how this person survived this situation. Then you have those electric egg boilers that have been there for long years. They were very popular in Germany. The only problem they had, which no one was aware of, was that they can only either boil hard eggs or boil medium eggs or boil soft eggs. And if you have a collaborative breakfast context, where you have 3 people sitting together and each of them has a different expectation on the preference on the consistency of the egg, hard, medium, soft, then these things didn't do the job. They just didn't. No one has ever thought about it, neither the people who had them at home, and the company that came up with a real innovative system. It's a company called Brainstream. They're based in Hanover, Germany. And approximately 2003, this must have been, they created a plastic egg with a microprocessor inside that you throw into the water in a classical pan with all the other eggs that you boil. And this plastic egg can find out whether the eggs in the pot have reached the consistency soft, or have reached the consistency medium, or have reached the consistency hard. And what this thing does is, as soon as all eggs in the pot are soft boiled, it starts singing. It sings "Killing Me Softly." That's what it does. And you can then select the eggs that you want to be soft boiled. You just take them out of the water. You leave the rest in the water until this egg starts singing another song, which is the song for the medium eggs, and this goes on until all the eggs are hard boiled. And then there is another song that comes up. It's a big fun for children, everybody at home. I know, lots of people have it. It's a big sales thing. And this is a solution, where I would say this is an innovative solution because it was the first device that really satisfied the user requirements that are actually there for egg boilers. So that's a nice example that shows you, if you go through an analytical process of identifying what people in a situation really need and what are the requirements on the system based on that, can bring you to innovation. Okay. Now, so that's the second example. Before I showed you this alarm clock. This is the egg boiler. We also do this in commercial or in projects for business products. This is, we've got plenty of clients who ask us for that service, and all it is user research leading to user requirements. That's all I'm talking about. It's a very sober thing I'm telling you. I just tell you, if you apply it systematically, you will predictedly come up with requirements for innovative solutions, which is quite nice. Okay. Now, that's as much as I want to say about how to derive user requirements from user needs systematically. An important next step is when you derive user requirements, that you structure them such that the project and those who are supposed to buy into them like them. And when you identify user needs and you derive user requirements, in a way, it's like digging for gold. You have lots of context information, which is the ground that you are digging. And in that ground, you have a machinery like this pot here, this what do you call it, a sieve, I think it's a sieve, where you have some mechanism that allows you to identify the gold nuggets within that large amount of information. And this is what I've shown you with that concept of user needs and user requirements. It's a tool to identify the gold nuggets in lots and lots of information. And once you have those gold nuggets, of course, you won't sell them by just keeping them in that green thing here and presenting them to your customers. What you have to do is you have to structure those those gold nuggets, those user needs and user requirements. You basically have to bring them in the shelf for the stakeholders of the project and the project team members, and also the users who are supposed to do something, or who are supposed to even validate whether these are the right requirements. And the way it works is that basically for all your documentations that you bring back from interviews and observations, that first you have a large list of user requirements which you have derived from user needs. It's a simplified figure, and then you structure them by the tasks to be supported by the system. If you really structure user requirements not by functionality or by system components or something like that, if you really structure them by what's also lately being referred to as the jobs to be done, the things that people really do with the system, then you will have a nice user requirement specification where all your user requirements are structured by activities that a system has to support anyway. And some of them might be the obvious ones where you just check, yes, we have, of course, we have to be able to select at what time the alarm clock shall start waking us up. But we also have one requirement that during that the user shall be able to recognize how much longer they can sleep at any time they look at the system. Okay. Here's just important to understand or to state that if you talk to 5 or 7 or 15 users, you don't come up with 15 user requirement specifications. You analyze the subjective data of your users for objective requirements that apply for all of them. And these you nicely structure by the tasks to be supported by the system. Okay. Now, there's always this question, probably this question is coming up in a minute. What is the difference between those user needs and user requirements in terms of, or what is the difference of them to user stories? And when it comes to those user stories and the question, what is a user story in comparison to user needs and user requirements? First, we have to understand there's a difference between product definition, or in English, sometimes you call it product planning, and product implementation. And when we define a product, when we basically define the product, when we fix what is this product, no matter how we build it, what is this product supposed to do for our users once it's finished, we have to deal with exactly those concepts like context of use, requirements, user requirements, user needs, specification of operating functions like a countdown that shows us how much longer we can sleep. And this is the product definition terminology that you use before you start building something, before you start implementing something. When it comes to product implementation, then we talk about product backlog and sprint backlog, and all of a sudden terms like user stories find their way into the project. And if you have a really close look at the difference between user needs, user requirements, and user stories, well, to begin with, they serve different purposes. A user need, here's the phrasing rule for it. You can really apply it literally exactly the way it's written up here. User needs are statements that are, or data that are used to find and specify user requirements systematically. We use the user needs to find the user requirements, okay? No matter when we will implement them. And they describe what is needed in the context of use without prescribing an operating function or any solution. The operating function is a specific term from the solution space. The user requirements are statements where we say, that's the phrasing rule. With the system, the user shall be able to recognize or select or input something. The something is always an information or a resource. And they are used to open the solution space above the hood. When we say with those egg boilers, with the egg boiler, the user shall be able to see which eggs are medium boiled, which are hard boiled, which are soft boiled. Then these requirements are our basis to find an innovative solution that serves them. So it's used to open the solution space. I exactly remember in 2001 when we came up with these requirements, our client said, impossible to build this. No idea how to do this. 3 years after it was on the market, and now a large manufacturer of household equipment is not building their traditional egg boilers anymore because Brainstream has grabbed the market. Go on their website. I don't get money from them, but go on their website. You will see an advanced company these days that has a very professional product management, that have localized their egg boilers around the globe with different melodies and looks and whatnot. Amazing. It's probably a Scottish one also, but the user requirements open the solution space without restricting it. They just tell you, this is what the solution has to do for the user. Think about how to do it, be creative. Then we have the system requirements. Okay, system requirements are just the requirements for the solution under the hood, and the user stories are actually statements that look at first sight, they look pretty close to user needs. As a user group, the user group also appears in here. I want to, which is the first thing where I would be careful, I want to, and then there is a statement in there of an operating function, of something that the user wants to in order to perform something. In literature, they say the value for the user, but if you really look at what people write into user stories, it's typically subtasks that people have to do anyway that are not yet supported by the system. Now, if I look, and they are used simply to steer implementation of functionality. They help you to say, okay, next week we're going to build this one, and the week after we're going to build that other user story. So they describe a piece of functionality that can be implemented within a limited space of time, which is also referred to as a sprint. Anyway, examples here from the alarm clock. I said before, the light sleeper needs to know how much longer they can sleep in order to decide whether they get up or stay in bed. That's a user need. There's no solution in there. User requirements: with the system, the user shall be able to recognize the time left until the alarm starts. Okay, but also if you dive deeper, I think that's what it is. If you dive deeper into it, with the system, the user shall be able to recognize whether they should get up even before the wake up time has been reached. So if the alarm clock says, Thomas, you better get up now, you will be in a mess if you wait until this thing starts beeping. That's good news. I will get up because I trust this thing, because I know all about it. So that's the statement of the user requirement for our alarm clock. System requirement, we had that before. That's the obvious thing. The system shall continuously calculate the difference between current time and set alarm time. And if you look at the user story, although it has a syntax that looks similar to what we see with the user need, it informs the team, as a light sleeper, I want to have a countdown on my alarm clock in order to monitor my remaining sleep time. That's very practical, and that's something that can be built by people who are implementing a product. And that's the big difference between the user needs statements, the user requirement statements, and the user story statements. And I think that's as much as I wanted to say today. Well, if you really want to find out how to do these things systematically and practice it and maybe get a certification for it because you want to be hired by one of those Californian companies who, I think it's about 5,000 job offerings in California at the moment. If you really want to learn all about it, the UXQB, International Usability and User Experience Qualification Board, has defined a certification scheme called the Certified Professional for User Requirements Engineering. And as part of such course, you really learn the details and the practice of it and the real mechanisms behind it. Right, Chris, I think that's as much as I wanted to say. I even managed to be in time, surprisingly. Here we are.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Thomas. And I should have mentioned it at the start, but if anyone had any questions, now is the time that we're going to discuss the questions. And I don't see any in the chat, but I'd like to open it up to any questions. Before we do, I'll just give you my comment. Once again, I always find this very refreshing. I got that deep dive into this during that advanced user requirements course that Thomas was pointing out at the end. And the number of sort of light bulb moments was tremendous during that, because the rigorous analytical approach that Thomas describes really, I think, is needed, because it's easy to come up with something innovative is something that's new or different. And I love that definition that you give for innovation, the solution that the user didn't realize for a problem the user didn't realize they had in the first place, or along those lines. And I tell you, every time I wake up in the middle of the night, saying, "Oh gosh, what's the time and all this." I think of that example. It's great. But let's have a little bit of a chat about some of the questions. While we're doing that, I see some questions coming in. Just pointing out, we have got another breakfast briefing coming up. We believe it'll be 19th of May, and that's going to be about WCAG 2.2. That's the world of web accessibility, or digital accessibility, I should say, is changing slightly. Coming up, we've got a revision to the accessibility guidelines in June, and we've been looking into the crystal ball to see what those are. And my colleagues will be presenting on that. I'll send you some further details on that. We also have other training courses coming up on customer journey mapping, accessibility, and the foundation course for the CPUX program as well. So more information on that on the UserVision site. But let's have a look at some of the questions. I see one here from Sam. Would you say that user research activity is a user research department role or a whole company role? So I guess this is, how do companies tend to manage that? I'd be interested in your view, Thomas, from working with so many companies.
Yes. Now, my experience of that is, before I talk about my experience, I want to make an interesting quote of the former CEO of a German company called SAP. SAP, is this big business software where users tend to wonder how to use it. And it was Hasso Plattner who once said, now be careful with what you write down, right? Each of our developers has to have talked to our users to get an impression of what happens in the real world. And that turned out to be a big mistake. Why is that a big mistake? Look at it from the client's perspective. What happened later on, and this is public domain, you can Google it with a bit of effort. Clients all of a sudden felt that every other day a person from SAP entered their site and asked the same question. And they were wondering, when will SAP ever learn what we really need? Because they're sending us people over asking the same questions again and again. Now, to come back to your question, what companies do who sort of who professionalize themselves in this, including SAP, all of a sudden they have departments called European user research, Asian user research, and this is a group of people who mainly go out in the field, do the user research, and come back with those needs and requirements. And it's the needs and requirements that the organization needs to know. That's the data that you bring back if you have an advanced process. You inventorize those data over time, and I highly recommend that the people who do that should be qualified teams who are specialized in that. That is my answer.
And is that because they'll have the best way they'll know how to ask the questions ideally?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as we know from those who do human-centered design know, interviewing users is not a simple thing. If you have teams interviewing users, they tend to discuss solutions with them and how the interface and whatnot and what they like, and Jesus Christ. And because of that, in the long run, I recommend this to be a department effort. I truly recommend this. In the short run, I would say, if you want to do this professionally, ideally, it should be a mixed team that goes out, where one of the people is a trained professional in the methodology to do this. And the others, typically as we do this as a coaching service, typically we coach product managers in product manufacturers organizations to slowly get their feet into this. Yeah. But in the long run, it should be a fixed group of people who do this. It's an illusion that you can send out everybody and then we know everything.
Yeah. And I sometimes say, things such as interviewing, talking to someone, doing a survey, and even usability testing can be done relatively easily, but that can be a problem because it's very easy to do a bad interview survey or usability test and get misleading information from it.
To go even further, just a very short one, the worst thing you can do is come back from user research with data that everybody knows. That's the worst thing you can end up with. That means you've done it exactly once. And if you really apply methods, you will surprise your teams, and you have to surprise your teams all the time. Otherwise, you never get the check to do this again after you've done it once. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I think we've answered Sam's follow-up question to that. I suppose anyone else have any questions? Feel free to take yourself off mute and ask the question verbally. That probably is easier than the
Mm.
chat. So if anyone does have any questions, I'd be glad to hear from that. Hear from you about that. Don't be shy. Let's see. Okay. Well, perhaps not. I think this is for me. I think that's it for the questions. Again, I think it's been fascinating to get this very structured analytical approach. Your core engineer side, Thomas, was showing throughout all this, and I think that's very much needed. I really love the rigor of the clear definitions between user needs, user requirements, and especially the difference between that and user stories, which is one that we commonly get asked as well. What is the difference? And it might be subtle, but I think you very clearly explained it there.
Mhm.
Well, once again, thank you very much. And especially those examples were fantastic. And perhaps we'll see you at our next breakfast briefing, which will be in about a month or a little less. And thank you very much, and hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.
Thanks.
Mhm.